So I love superheroes and I fucking love comic books. I love the escapades in space or the multiverse. I love the brawls with reptilian foes and seedy city sewers. And I love the ever expanding and always convoluted lore. And while I know that these people, these characters aren't real, I love that I get a very real sense of hope and inspiration from them. And I've always been enamored by fictional stories. I've been interested in made up worlds and inspired by imaginary heroes for as long as I can remember. And when I was a kid, I lived in what was, at that point in my life, a pretty conservative Christian household. One that was kind of low on non-essential funds and wasn't really ready for me to start looking into like secular comic books or stories in general, for the most part. Because of this, I didn't often get to indulge in the escapism that entertainment and media could give. So I really treasured what I could get. I love the movies I did have, as evidenced by the super worn down VHS tapes of Star Wars, the original trilogy, and Jurassic Park, movies that I constantly watched as a kid. But, you know, when I was young, that was what we had. And with those 4 movies, it lit up something in me, imagination wise. And it gave me a hunger for more worlds, more fictional characters and stories. And I loved cartoons of all kinds, but since I didn't have cable for the longest time, I was limited to stuff like educational PBS cartoons for kids and Saturday morning cartoons. But every once in a while, though, I did get lucky, and I would go to my grandparents' house, and this is where everything changed. It was the house with cable. It was the house with Cartoon Network. It was the house with superheroes. The house with Batman the Animated Series. And when I went there, I got to watch that show. It became one of my favorite shows of all time. And I learned about my favorite fictional character in any piece of media or entertainment, Bruce Wayne, aka the Batman. Batman the Animated Series shaped my personality, my taste in shows and media in general, and my character in more ways than I could possibly imagine. Definitely more ways than I could ever tell you. And I can tell you that it shaped and started a ripple effect from that point on as a kid that will last all the way until I die. It just is what it is. And I'll never be able to fully explain it or tell you how it changed me, but I can tell you that it did. It's one of those things that you just kind of know, you know? And I was enamored with the whole thing. I loved its Art Deco style. I loved Gotham City as a character, as its own character. And I love the show's ability to focus on the history and morality of its characters and villains and stories rather than always play to a super generic, simple villain of the week, case of the week kind of structure. It did have that, but focused on a lot more of that, focused on the villains as characters a lot, which I really, as a kid, kind of shaped the villains I like, And Batman himself was a character going through constant change and adversity. And while that's nothing new for the character, at the time when I was a kid, it was something not always present in other characters of cartoons and media that I watched. Episodes like Perchance to Dream are a testament to this kind of storytelling. It's a story where Bruce is stuck in an idyllic dream world, a world where his parents are still alive, where he's in a relationship with Selena Kyle, and a world where he's not Batman. It kind of goes over Bruce's ability to experience happiness even as Batman and whether or not he can ever truly be happy and what is Batman to him. And Bruce struggles with accepting his own happiness, whether it's real or false. And that even though Batman was born out of his parents' death, it is a part of his identity and his self just as much as the identity of Bruce Wayne is. That the Batman is no longer a costume. It's no longer just an idea or a separate entity, but a realization of himself and his will. The episode is him coming to terms with his identity as a whole, and with Batman being one of the first characters I really looked up to and aspired to be like, that episode and its storytelling really stuck with me. Seeing that Batman, of all people, could go through something similar and come out the other side knowing himself even more was really comforting. The whole series is filled with stories like that, such as Mask of the Phantasm, which is another story where, Batman kind of grasps with the struggle that is being Batman and also having some sort of personal life, and is Batman just a mask or is it actually a piece of Bruce that that at this point will never go away. The movie Mask of the Phantasm and the episode Perchance to Dream, while similar in theme, explore this theme in very different ways. Hell, so many of his stories, whether they're on screen or on a page, evoke similar emotions. I don't relate to Batman because I'm a genius or I'm stealthy or I'm physically gifted. I don't relate to his wealth or his charisma or his scientific prowess. I relate to Bruce Wayne because of his ability to strive, to survive and to move forward, to stumble and then fall and pick himself back up. I relate to his representation of humanity and its inherent will, its inherent drive. That's what makes superhero stories some of the most incredible top-tier tales you can find. It's not just that they're modern mythology, it's that they're relatable modern mythology. And for the longest time, the show was all I had. When I wasn't watching some movie, or I was catching an episode of the Batman where I can, or putting the very occasional work into my education, and I do mean very occasional, I was learning about Batman in a way that I couldn't learn watching the show. I was reading about him on Wikipedia. And from there, I learned about every hero I could. DC, Marvel, Wildstorm, you name it, I was looking into it. I figured out what I couldn't read, I could at least read about. I read Wikipedia near constantly, reading the biographies and origins of characters, the plots of entire runs or event comics, and following link trees from one character to the next, trying to figure out who they relate to and what characters cross over into what worlds and whose stories. I knew the story beats of books like Infinite Crisis and Infinity Gauntlet a decade before I even picked the book up. I knew the background of Kane the Conqueror 15 years before I even saw him on a page. I knew the threat of Darkseid before ever getting to watch a Justice League Unlimited episode. I couldn't see everything play out in book or TV, but I could imagine what it was like. I created whole scenes, whole movies in my head. It made me obsessed with stories and fiction, even more than I already was. And as I grew up, that obsession with comic book characters grew out towards all pieces of media. Movies, TV shows, music, everything I couldn't experience, I read about. I started to grow a collection of physical media. Movies upon movies in Blu-ray, any seasons of well-received TV series, including Batman the Animated Series, and collecting music, vinyls, and CDs. I started getting it all. After a while, I realized that I was missing a collection that I had always wanted, had always kept up with, but never had the opportunity to have true access to. Fucking comic books. After I realized that, I went into overdrive and read every single story I could remember. Every single story that I ever read about. It sounds silly, but it was cathartic to finally fully get into the medium. And I never really truly appreciated the depth these stories had until I got them in front of me. An unsurprising amount of people look at superhero stories and comics in general as solely an outlet for children's stories. That these are only for kids and that adults who enjoy them are wholly immature and kind of infantilized. That they are just high quality picture books. And this could literally not be further from the truth. Of course, just like every entertainment medium, there are a bunch of comic books aimed at the younger generation, aimed at kids. This idea is fed into even more by the recent wave of superhero movies, specifically Marvel movies that, while not always having been the bastions of cinematic excellence anyway, have been sticking to a worn-out formula with quippy, often kind of witless comedy, and fluffed up storytelling with a lack of relatable stakes. I'm holding out severe hope for Fantastic Four First Steps and Superman though. Really excited for those. They look good. They look kind of like a departure, which I'm all for. That being said, some of the most complex stories and writers in all of media and pop culture that I've ever seen come from comics. They write stories that would fry most kids' brains trying to read. Not that they're too above kids or they're too dark or they're edgy or something like that. It's not the content, it's the density, the story itself being a little bit above your average 13 or 14-year-old's pay grade. Stories that even with characters such as Superman and Batman can be kind of existentially heavy, dialogue dense, thematically abstract, and downright nihilistic or depressing sometimes. You know, writers like Grant Morrison, for example, have a real good grasp on the overall whimsy, the emotion, and the feeling of childlike wonder that these stories can evoke. While on the other hand, stories like Animal Man, and especially the incredibly dense and foreboding Final Crisis, the whimsy and wonder is a side dish to absurdly weighty, psychedelic, and metafictional storytelling. Final Crisis, while my favorite comic book of all time, is more like an apocalyptic epic with an underlying meta-take on comics as a whole than a traditional superhero story. A story where a god of evil manifests physically on Earth, where reality itself is collapsing under the weight of such a crushing darkness coming through, where iconic heroes die, where good was crushed with an unholy fist. It's a story about the day evil won. And it's definitely more the Iliad/Odyssey, in my opinion, than, say, Enter the Spider-Verse, which that in and of itself is a testament to the storytelling potential of comic books, even superhero-oriented ones. You know, if you made it to the end of this little spewing of consciousness, I really appreciate it. This was actually supposed to be a review of Fantastic Four by Jonathan Hickman, his entire run. I recently finished it yesterday, and I gotta tell you, it's incredible. And, you know, when I always talk about something, especially if I'm talking to people that don't know me very well, I always feel like I have to preface things with the fact that I really do love and I am passionate about what I'm talking about. Because it's often, especially on YouTube and some of these places, that the people that talk about the things or the subjects that they cover aren't necessarily passionate about them. I can't remember the name of this guy. He was a music YouTuber. I think he covered metal specifically. Pretty recently, he gave up covering metal. I think he sold his channel or something like that. And he admitted that he never actually even liked metal, much less loved it or was passionate about it. It was a business to him. It was strictly something to build up his brand, to get money, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I feel like you're kind of doing a disservice to yourself and to the people you're talking to if you're talking about and covering things that you don't even like, you know? So I started this as a review for Fantastic Four, and I started writing an intro to that video about how much I loved comics in general, and it just turned into making that its own video, so that y'all will know that I really, really love this, and that my reviews and my reading and talking about these stories comes from the heart. You know, I get emotional reading these stories. Yeah, this as silly as that sounds, I love them. So I really just want to thank y'all. Please subscribe, like, stay tuned. The review is coming, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.